What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 335 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about Batman, the Golden Age Omnibus, Volume 1. This is roughly the first 2 years of Batman comics. It collects several issues. It's about 800 pages long. It collects Detective Comics 27 through 56, Batman issues 1 through 7, New York World's Fair Comics issue 2, World's Best Comics issue 1, and World's Finest Comics issues 2 and 3. And this collects, I think, the first 4 volumes of Batman Chronicles. If you remember, about 10 years ago, DC started doing these Chronicles volumes. They did about 10 volumes of Batman Chronicles. They did some volumes for Superman from the Golden Age, Wonder Woman from the Golden Age. I think they even touched on Silver Age Flash and Silver Age Green Lantern, basically trying to find an inexpensive way of reprinting those comics from a long time ago. And then eventually they gave up on it, and then much more recently they started doing these omnibus editions, which I like that because it covers a lot more ground, and hopefully, knock on something, they're not going to give up on it halfway through, and then we will have this big, huge chunk of Batman comics missing that hasn't been collected. I would really like to see them see this through and keep going with these for people like me who's really interested in the history of a character that I like. Pretty much all of that stuff back there behind me is Batman comics, so I like the character quite a bit, and I did a review of the first volume of Batman Chronicles a few years ago, and what I said about that volume was that it was very interesting historically, but the stories themselves might not have been very good. And I maintain that assessment looking at this volume. This collects, like I said, I think the first 2 years of Batman comics, and a lot of times it's very interesting to see some of the earliest villains showing up and how they were treated, how they came about. Characters like the Scarecrow, he's pretty much unchanged. He's pretty much exactly as you think of the Scarecrow today. Catwoman, she's not called Catwoman. She doesn't wear a costume, but she is called the Cat, and she is Selina Kyle. So she is pretty much all the way there. The Joker, he's pretty much already a fully formed version of the character that we know. He doesn't get an origin story, so that's something that I was a little bit surprised about, because I know that the Red Hood element of his origin story, that's not something that was created by Alan Moore and Brian Bolland. That's an element that predates The Killing Joke by several years, and for some reason I was thinking that we were going to see that in the Golden Age stuff, but we don't see it in this volume. So we do get to see characters like that, but we also get to see characters like Batman's girlfriend, who's a nurse, Linda Page, and we get to see Julie Madison, and these are characters who they don't really have a place in the Batman mythos today. Julie Madison is kind of well known. She was in Batman and Robin, which, yes, you can make fun of that movie, but she was in one of the Batman movies. Linda Page is a character I had never heard of before reading this book, and she basically fulfills the same role that Julie Madison did. She makes fun of Bruce for being just a wimp, and then she talks about how awesome Batman is. Obviously, I can't see this relationship going anywhere, and obviously we all know that it won't go anywhere, because here we are 80 years later, and Batman is not with Linda Page. But you got characters like that. You got this one police officer, I cannot remember his name, but he is kind of the comic relief cop who is always kind of blundering onto the scene. He is trying to arrest the Batman, because in this book, they kind of go back and forth between is the Batman an enemy of the police, or is he an ally? Sometimes the police are like busting onto the scene and they're like, well, it's Batman and Robin, and then Batman and Robin will fight them and escape, and then sometimes they're working with the police. So it's a little inconsistent there, but a lot of stuff here is stuff that it takes a little while for it to get to the point where we think of as being intrinsically part of Batman. For example, in this book, they do not mention Gotham City at all. Several times they mention New York City, but it takes them a little while past this volume before they actually say that Batman is set in Gotham City. Also, there is no bat signal. I don't remember the bat signal showing up at all in this book. What we do see several times is Bruce Wayne, not in his Batman costume, just hanging out with Commissioner Gordon, and then one of the detectives will come and say, hey, Commissioner, we have a case. And so Commissioner's like, hey, Bruce, you want to tag along? And Bruce is like, oh, I'm really bored, so sure, I'll tag along. And then I guess that's something that was done in the 1930s, where the Commissioner of the New York City Police would bring his rich socialite friends with him on crime scenes, and then once they get there, Bruce is like, well, I'm bored, so I'm going to leave, and then he'll dress up as a Batman and he'll try and solve the case. It took them a little while to figure out that's a really clunky way of getting Batman into these stories. Maybe we can find a better way to do it, so I'm really looking forward to getting to see the bat signal, and so we don't have to see this really weird, clunky way of getting Batman involved in these stories. One thing that you will hear a lot of people talk about is that Batman used to kill people, and that he used to be a really really violent vigilante, and that's true. We do get to see him killing a lot of people in this book, and a lot of people will tell you that once Robin came onto the scene, that Batman suddenly lightened up and he was much more of a gentle father figure, and that is not true. There is a bunch of stuff in this book well after Robin is introduced where they are still killing bad guys. In fact, there are several issues where Robin kills a bad guy. So anytime you watch something where someone says that Robin lightened the Batman comics and it immediately turned into a happy-go-lucky fun time once Robin was on the scene, that is not the case. There was still a whole lot of stuff here where Batman and Robin are, if not actually causing the death of bad guys, kind of like in the first issue of Batman, or Detective Comics 27, where he says a fitting end for his kind. They may not be actually causing the death of the bad guys. At the very least, they are very complicit in the death of those bad guys, and they're not shedding any tears. I feel like modern Batman, he would be trying a little harder to save these bad guys, but in several of these cases, I think you can make a case that Batman and Robin are straight up the cause of death of these bad guys. And that's something it's probably going to take it a little while to get to the point where they're saying, hey, parents groups are breathing down our neck. You're going to have to stop on the death and mayhem here. Batman and Robin cannot be involved with the death of any of these bad guys. So that's something that I learned reading this, that a lot of people would say, like, oh, once Robin came on, it became a much kid-friendlier book. That's not entirely the case. Also, we get to see characters like, I don't know if I mentioned Scarecrow. He shows up here, and he is pretty much the Scarecrow that we know today. His origin here is very similar to the character that we have today. He didn't really go through a lot of changes. You have some characters like Clayface. There have been like 5 Clayfaces over the years, and this Clayface is a very interesting version, but he doesn't have any superpowers. He is not made out of clay like some of the later versions. He's just a normal, crazy, weird bad guy. So it took them a little trial and error to get to a point where they had a Clayface that I guess people liked a lot more than this one. Personally, I like this one quite a bit, but I can also see the appeal of a giant mud monster that fights Batman. But you have this Clayface who isn't really that similar to the Clayface that we know today, but then you have the Scarecrow who is very similar. You have the Joker who is pretty much the same as the Joker that we know today. So it's really interesting getting to see some of the elements that we recognize almost immediately pop up. Commissioner Gordon and Batman being Bruce Wayne, those are there in the very first issue. Robin is there within 6 months. So it doesn't take long for some of these elements and characters to kind of solidify themselves within the Batman universe. But then some of these other elements, it takes a little while for them to show up. Some of the elements present in this book, it's going to take a little while before they realize, hey, Linda Page not really working out as our love interest. We're going to get rid of her and try something new. So that's what's interesting about this book. I don't know if I would recommend this to anyone who likes modern day Batman and hasn't really ventured much past the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths Batman stuff. This, I feel like, is interesting from a historical perspective. I don't think that I would go so far as to say that it's necessarily a good book. If you are unsure about it, if you don't know if you want to commit to all 800-something pages of this book, there are smaller volumes that are just called Batman the Golden Age Volume 1, and it's a paperback, and it collects about half of what's in here. So that's still about 400 pages, so if you want to risk it, I would recommend trying out one of those volumes, and then if you really like it, then you can get the Batman the Golden Age Volume 2, which is also paperback, and then you could jump in on an Omnibus if you want. But I would not just recommend jumping into the Omnibus cold if you don't really know anything about the Golden Age and if you're not sure if you would like this. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Batman the Golden Age Volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.